Chapter 21. With an imperceptible nod, Salangi focused on the copper tray at their feet. A fraction of a second later, the book lay on the tray. "I wish I would know how to do that," Dan said, laughing. "I suppose we only learn to do that, make things appear and disappear when we're dead." Salangi shook her head. "Whatever you learned on Earth, you take with you, Dan. And you're the one who wished to see the book, not me, and it appeared to you." All right, Dan said, showing his impatience. "Let's see what it says now." At these words, the book vanished. "Oh no," Malou exclaimed. "What's happened? Why was Dan unable to grab it before it disappeared?" "The answer to your question is actually the basis for your next task," Damien replied, handing the book to Dan. "You see, it is not because you wish for something to occur that it will necessarily eventuate, Dan. You can only accomplish your goal, whatever it may be, by travelling a path frothed of many opportunities and many obstacles. I guess Damienos mentioned some of them when we were in the witch's house, didn't he?" Dan said, turning to Malou. "Yes, he talked a lot about frustration, though, but I don't think that would be one of our next tasks." "No, I don't think so," Salangi replied, a broad smile appearing on her lips. With the book lying in his lap, Dan looked at his three companions in turn. "Do you think it's safe to open it now?" he asked Damien. "I should hope so," Damien replied, chuckling. "Okay then, let's see," Dan said, opening the large volume to the last chapter and reading the 2 paragraphs aloud. "Patience is a virtue which we are all endowed. However, circumstances drive us to foster impatience rather than its worthwhile opposite. If frustration is allowed to set in, your opportunities will become obstacles and your goal will be farther than you ever expected. When you reach the level of impatience required to tolerate and accept your situation, you will be on the road of your recovery, if such is your goal." The moment Dan closed the book, he and Malou found themselves in a room lined with wood panelling and furnished of only 3 seats. The winged chairs were upholstered of burgundy, velvet fabric and studded with brass buttons. Looking down, Malou immediately noticed that she and Dan were now dressed in normal city clothes. "Where is this place?" Dan asked, looking round him. "Who's the 3rd chair for, do you think?" "I suppose we'll find out when we sit down," Malou suggested. As they did, suddenly the room filled up with furniture, a desk in a corner, a table and chairs in another, and windows affording a beautiful view of a park appeared on the far wall. When they turned their heads from the windows and looked in the opposite direction, to their surprise, embers were burning gently in the hearth of the handsome fireplace. Dan half expected to see Damienos appear in the 3rd seat, dressed in a tweed suit and smoking a pipe. He laughed at the thought. Yet his laughter was short-lived when he and Malou saw a hidden door open and a small man enter. He was walking hesitantly toward them and said, "Am I in the right place?" Noticing that the man, who was attired of a tattered suit, a shirt that had probably seen better days, and a vest that seemed to be 3 sizes too big for him, Malou asked, "Do you know where this place is?" "How should I know where this place is, my dear, since I don't know where we are?" he sniggered, and took a couple of more steps inside the room. "Why don't you have a seat and tell us where you think you should be?" Dan suggested. "Where is this seat you are referring to, son?" "Don't you see it?" Malou asked, trying to focus on the man's face. "No, I don't see, my dear. I am blind." "Let me help you, then," Dan said, getting up and walking toward the old fellow. "No, I don't need your help or anyone else's. I have lost my sight, but not my hearing, young man. In the dark, which is my world, I will find you. Return to your seat and keep talking," he ordered. Dan didn't pay any mind to the man's request and strode toward him, and then grabbing his arm, he said, "Come on, I'll show you." "Don't you dare handle me like you do a child," the old man blurted, wrenching his arm from Dan's grip. "Okay, then, have it your way. I was only trying to help," Dan said, regaining his seat and shaking his head. "The name is Harold, by the way. What's yours?" "I am Dan, and my name is Malou." "All right, then. I'll be with you in just a minute," Harold said, walking toward the window and bumping against the desk on the way. "Why don't you keep talking? I can't hear where I'm going if you keep your mouth shut." His face wrinkled with the dryness of old age, his eyes fixed in a stare. Harold appeared to have no inclination to move from his spot. Okay, Harold," Dan said, his voice rising above normal. "We're in the middle of the room waiting for you to get here." Harold turned abruptly on his heels. "You don't have to shout. I'm blind, not deaf, you know." "Well then," Malou said, "why don't you follow my voice? I'm sitting about 10 feet from where you're standing, and you just have to walk straight ahead of you, and you'll find the seat in which I guess you're supposed to sit." The only problem with that explanation, my dear, is that I don't have any idea what 10 feet is. You might as well have told me that you're sitting on the moon. All the same to me. Well, if you place one foot in front of the other 10 times, you will have walked approximately 10 feet, Dan said, watching the man. He knew Harold was here to try his patience, and it should be simple enough to guide this old guy to the chair without too much trouble, he thought. However, Harold stood still, standing by the window. I don't think your assumption is correct, Dan, he said with a shrug. You see, I've learned to calculate the distance between the echo and the actual sound of a voice, and I can tell you that you two are farther than 10 paces. Well, if you know that, why don't you walk the distance and see if you get to the chair where you're supposed to sit? All right, then, I will try, Harold replied, walking slowly straight ahead of him. Aren't you going to stop me? You're not near the chair yet. When you'll get there, we'll stop you, Dan replied. Okay, now I hear you, Harold said, taking a couple of more steps toward the chair. When he was near it, he extended a hand to touch its back. Aha, there it is, he exclaimed, a smile appearing at the corner of his lips. He then rounded the chair and sat down, finally. Good, Malou said. Now that you've reached your destination, would you tell us why you're here? Oh, yes, of course. I was just trying to see if you would attempt to help me even though I didn't want your help. Is that supposed to mean something to us? Oh, yes, Dan, it does. You see, there will be many a time when you will not be accepting or tolerating any assistance from anyone when you will try to walk again. Yet you will need to learn how to navigate on your own before you try denying anyone's help. Such as you did with calculating the echo's distance. Is that it? Malou asked. Yes, in fact it took me months to master the art, but with some expert's help I would have managed it in much less time. All right, but I will probably accept all the help I can get, my situation being a little different from yours. Not so different than you might think, Dan. You see, your stubbornness will engender the frustration you will inevitably encounter, and as you know, impatience is its first cousin, so I would suggest that you arm yourself with all the patience in the world from now on, and forget everything else that could eventually stop you in your progress. And don't they ask people like Dan to do a lot on their own? Malou inquired. Ah, very good question, my dear. In fact, anyone attempting to reach a goal in life is deemed to be told, do it yourself at one point, and this is when you will call for help and will not get any. This is another instance where impatience and frustration can set in, but it is also an instance where you can use one of your best weapons, determination. And what happens now? Dan asked, once again showing his impatience. You've told us and demonstrated what sort of patience I will need to overcome some of the obstacles I will face down the road, so what's next? The old man unexpectedly snapped his fingers and vanished literally into thin air. Getting used to these sudden changes in the surroundings and circumstances, Malou and Dan looked at each other and smiled. Do you think anyone else will come in now? I don't think so, Dan, Malou replied, standing up. And where do you think you're going? Damien said, appearing near the window with Solangi standing next to him. I thought we were done with the patience bit, Dan said, getting up too. Not quite, but since you're up, why don't you come over here and watch the people in the garden? Damien suggested. Malou and Dan did as bidden and went to stand by the couple. You see, these people have all failed to understand what patience, tolerance, and acceptance could have done for them. Damien pointed to a half a dozen people walking around aimlessly. They all seemed in a daze, abandoned in time. Who are they? Malou asked. These are people wrapped in their world, Solangi answered, enveloped in their life's circumstances, unable to interpate themselves from the ever-oppressive routines of work and chores. Do they know what they're missing? No, Dan, they don't, and don't even want to acknowledge their loss, Damien explained. You see, before your accident, you were one of these people. You had lost all understanding of the importance of patience, acceptance, and tolerance. How? You will know when you return to 2013, but for now, let's concentrate on your new situation and the type of routine you will need to avoid. You mean avoid the ruts we would have dug in the road of our lives? Malou asked. Very good metaphor, Malou, but avoiding digging these ruts will be even better, Damien said, handing the book to Dan once again. The next passage in the last chapter should guide you in doing exactly that, while evading the routines imposed by your busy lives. Dan looked up at Damien. He smiled. Thanks. I didn't like this place anyway, he remarked, his eyes travelling around the room. Standing side by side, Malou and Dan then focused on the open page before them. Dan read, There is much to learn on the roads of accomplishing one's dream. Together with patience, tolerance, and acceptance, you will need determination to reach your goal. Giving up or quitting should not be part of your life now. Only with determination to reach your goal will you be able to have the patience, tolerance, and acceptance to attain your desired aim. "That should be an easy one for you, Dan," they heard Damiano say from behind them. Malou and Dan spun on their heels to face the shepherd. The room had disappeared, only to be replaced by a sight the couple could hardly believe. They were standing by a cart filled with strange roots and leaves and yoked to a couple of bullocks. The air was dry and dusty. Dan cracked up laughing. "You're unbelievable, Damianos. Where are we this time?" "You're on the road to delivering goods to the market, Dan. You and Malou need to drive this cart to the coast and sell the cassava roots to the highest bidder." "But we don't know anything about these things," Malou argued. "We've never farmed anything in our lives, let alone lead a couple of bullocks and a cart to market." "There are many things one needs to learn in life, Malou. And perhaps when you accept my help, tolerate my presence, and exercise the patience required to lead these beasts of burden to their destination, will you have acquired the determination necessary to turn to the next page of your book. And I suppose we have to avoid the ruts of routine along the way. Is that it?" Dan asked. "I should think it would be a good idea, yes."